The subcommittee will come to order. By the way, before we get started, I want to take the time to recognize our minority clerk, Kate Hallahan. Today's Kate's last hearing. I'm not sure if they're applauding. Yeah, I don't know if Kate, I'm not sure if they're applauding because you're leaving. I mean, I'm not sure what this is, but she has now, again, after 29 years of federal service, I will tell you personally, I have thoroughly enjoyed working with Kate. She's incredibly knowledgeable on transportation issues. Her dedication to this committee and to the members of this committee has been unwavering. I consider her a friend, and Kate, you will be deeply, deeply missed. Now we should be able to applaud, I think, now that, right? And I do also want to congratulate Joe Carlisle. He'll be taking over as Minority Staff Director. We all obviously know him. He has been a valued member of this THUD team, again, with deep understanding of this bill. And so, Joe, congratulations. All of us look forward to continue working with you. And you know that you've got big shoes to fill, but we know you're ready. So with that, but Kate, love you, I miss you, and miss you already.
The gentleman yield.
Mr. Chairman, yes, sir.
Let me add to that. She has been a stalwart worker in this cause for a good while, and we are going to miss her. So in the next chapter of your life, Katie, good luck. Godspeed to you.
Absolutely. Thank you. Why don't we do something very briefly? Ranking member, why don't I yield to the ranking member and then to Ms. Lowy very briefly?
I'll have something in my statement,
all right,
Chairman, but I will happily yield to Ms. Lowy.
Well, I had something in the statement, but I think it's so important. I'd rather begin at this point because I have known Kate Hallahan for a very long time. In fact, my middle daughter was deputy at the Department of Transportation years ago, and she told me all about Kate. 29 years of government service. She is dynamic, she is hardworking, she is dedicated, and she has spent an incredible portion of that career dedicating herself to this subcommittee. I always say, Kate, you're the answer woman. You ask her a question, she knows the answer, and if she doesn't, boy, she gets it for you quickly. How fortunate we have all been to have the counsel of Kate. And Kate, I just wish you good luck, and I know we will all stay in touch. We will all miss you, and I know you will continue to succeed in whatever you decide to do, even if it's just enjoying the day and the sunshine. So thank you so very much, Kate. We love you, we appreciate you, and we support you in everything you want to do in your future. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Lowy. And again, Mr. Secretary, thank you for your indulgence, and to each and every member of the subcommittee, because it is a special day, bittersweet day for all of us here in the subcommittee. Today we welcome Secretary Julian Castro from the Department of Housing and Urban Development to discuss fiscal year 2017 budget request. HUD is requesting a total of $49 billion in new budgetary resources in fiscal year 2017, about 3.5% above 2016. Now, this is not a dramatic increase. Unfortunately, however, there are so many accounting gimmicks in the budget as a whole that it makes it difficult to, frankly, take any of it very seriously. We don't need to look further than, frankly, other cabinet agencies funded by this subcommittee to demonstrate that point. As we saw in the previous hearing, the Department of Transportation's budget uses gimmicks to cheat the bipartisan budget agreement by nearly $10 billion. However, the Appropriations Committee must abide by the agreement. So the administration is only, frankly, cheating itself out of the opportunity to communicate its priorities. The Appropriations Committee must pass bills within the discretionary caps that we have all agreed to in last year's budget deal. And we cannot depend on accounting gimmicks to do so. So even in the HUD request itself, we find evidence of the administration gaming the system and breaking promises made just last year. Like DOT, HUD proposes billions of dollars in extra spending by classifying new programs as mandatory. Look, spending is spending, regardless of how it is categorized. Just because you call it mandatory doesn't mean that it won't increase our national debt. Even more frustrating, however, is the lack of specifics. Mr. Secretary, your request makes a commitment of over $11 billion in new programs for which you provide no details, no legislative language, and really not much more than, frankly, lofty talking points and wishful thinking. So don't get me wrong. You know, I represent low-income and urban areas, and I totally support the spirit of HUD's mission and the desire to always try to do more. My mayors and city councils and community leaders and constituents all rely on HUD programs. But that is why it is so important that HUD is real, gets real about its resource challenges to help us, to help this subcommittee identify which programs must be made priority in this next year. In addition to targeting the right priorities, it's so critical that HUD be a good steward of its resources, as nearly all of what HUD oversees helps the most vulnerable and deals with the most vulnerable. Yet I continue to receive reports. I continue to receive reports that HUD has tremendous difficulty with basic management. The number and the seriousness of negative Inspector General reports is frankly is astonishing. Poor financial controls, possible Anti-Deficiency Act violations, lax program oversight, major risks to IT systems, major gaps in cybersecurity. The list goes on and on and on. Now, you see, I want to work with the administration to make HUD the high-quality, high-functioning organization that it must be to oversee these important programs. If the department remains this dysfunctional, frankly, what hope is there that we can tackle homelessness, that we can tackle economic stagnation and all other major challenges that are part of HUD's mission? I look forward to working with you, Mr. Secretary, and I think we enjoy a great relationship and a great communications. So I look forward to working with you as we make the hard choices necessary to meet our nation's housing and economic development needs, all while being accountable to the taxpayer and respectful of last year's bipartisan budget agreement that, again, we are bound by. Now, before we go to your opening statement, Mr. Secretary, I would now like to recognize the ranking member of this subcommittee, the gentleman from North Carolina, Mr. Price, for his opening statement. Mr. Price, you're recognized, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I want to join you in welcoming our Secretary of Housing and Urban Development, Julian Castro. Glad to have you with the subcommittee. Now, I also want to say a few words about our retiring Democratic clerk, Kate Hallahan. We really hate to see her go, as the remarks of other members have indicated. You've heard about her past 29 years in public service. I think of Kate as the model of what public service is about. She started on the Hill in the office of Representative Al Swift of Washington State, worked at the Department of Transportation, then at the Senate Appropriations Committee before she joined us and settled down for a while in 2006. Kate simply has an expertise in transportation policy that's unmatched. She also knows the Hill very well and the appropriations process very well. She is, and she knows everybody. Everybody knows and likes Kate and admires her, respects her, has that network of personal contacts which let her be very, very effective and find out the answer to any question anybody raises just very, very quickly and effectively. She's tireless, she's determined, she's creative in finding a way to get the job done, even against formidable odds, as they often are formidable. She does it all with terrific good humor and a cooperative, engaging manner. So I'm really sorry to see Kate go. We all are. We wish her well. She's earned this retirement. Still, we're going to miss her. So congratulations and Godspeed. Now, turning to the request before us, the fiscal 2017 HUD budget request provides $38 billion in resources. That's $628 million reduction from last year's level. The lower number comes from higher anticipated receipts, although I think that receipt number is likely to change once CBO scores the request. As was true with the Department of Transportation, the constraints of the budget agreement, which only partially corrects the distortions of sequestration, mean that it's likely the bill we put forward will not sufficiently address the known needs of housing in our communities. An estimated 3 out of 4 eligible low-income households do not receive federal rental assistance because of funding limitations. And it's well known that most public housing authorities are overwhelmed with multi-year wait lists for access to subsidized housing. So the resources available to this subcommittee make it virtually certain that we can only address the most pressing needs rather than thinking boldly about the future of housing in this country. Underscoring this reality, more than 3/4 of this budget request is dedicated simply towards maintaining current tenants in housing. In this budget environment, simply keeping pace with our existing obligations is a challenging task. We know we have a maintenance backlog of over $25 billion. That's $25 billion in our nation's public housing stock. Unfortunately, in this era of fiscal fundamentalism, providing the budget resources to eliminate this backlog is impossible. Even the more manageable goal of simply keeping up with the annual accrual needs, about $3 billion for the Public Housing Capital Fund each year, that remains out of reach. Our states are struggling to provide housing and opportunities for people with disabilities. Yet this budget would provide no additional resources to build new housing for this extremely vulnerable segment of the population. Similarly, we've built no new Section 202 rental housing for the elderly for years. This budget wouldn't change that. Even after the disaster in Flint, which exposed the dangers of underinvestment in our infrastructure and the persistent threat of lead in many communities, this budget requests flat funding for lead hazard reduction activities. That, despite the clear need for more resources. In fact, in fiscal 2015, the department could only fund about half of the applicants seeking to remove the presence of lead from their local housing stocks. I hope this request reflects a belief inside the administration that Congress intends to deal with this issue, rather than a belief that we do not need increased resources to address this health hazard. Simply put, this budget request lays bare the difficulty of allocating sufficient resources for our housing and community development priorities, especially when the majority continues to insist on misguided and arbitrary constraints on discretionary spending. Meanwhile, and this is the irony, mandatory spending and tax expenditures, which are the primary drivers of our long-term deficit, remain unaddressed. Now, there are a few bright spots, and I'll close with those, despite these concerns. The Choice Neighborhoods Initiative, for example, a program that revitalizes and transforms communities by modernizing aging public housing. That receives a modest increase. The request also increases $88 million for new resources for homeless families with children. And to confront the challenges of housing in Indian country, the request includes targeted increases in programs for Native Americans to improve living conditions and provide economic opportunity. I'm also pleased the budget request again proposes to update the statutory formula for the Housing Opportunities for People with AIDS program, HOPWA, to ensure that our limited federal resources are allocated to jurisdictions with the most need. I'm hopeful HUD will continue to work closely with me and members of the Authorizing Committee to ensure that an updated formula is passed into law during this Congress. So, Ms. Secretary, I look forward to hearing your testimony today, working with you on all of these important programs. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, Mr. Price. Now, it was always a privilege to be able to recognize the chairman of the full committee, the gentleman from Kentucky, Chairman Rogers.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thanks for the introduction. Mr. Secretary, welcome to the Kate Show. We're delighted to have you with us to talk about your budget requests, which, as the chairman has said, is $48.9 billion in discretionary funds, which is a $1.6 billion increase over current levels. But additionally, as has been said, you've requested $11 billion in funding for new programs on the mandatory side of the ledger. The amount alone is shocking, but the fact that the administration is proposing new mandatory programs with no specific information or details as to where it goes, that's especially disturbing. Unfortunately, this has been a troublesome and recurring theme across the budget, and I've conveyed a similar message to your departmental colleagues in the past 2 weeks. In December, we came to a bipartisan agreement with the White House on spending caps for the fiscal year, and we simply can't afford and cannot and will not tolerate efforts to circumvent those caps by putting these funds on automatic pilot in the mandatory column, over which we have no control. Although it required many difficult decisions, Congress followed the law and stayed within the caps for the 2016 omnibus bill. I hope the message is clear that this committee is committed to staying within those caps for fiscal 2017. If these programs are truly priorities for the administration, we'll need to find a way to make it work within the agreed-upon framework, and we look forward to working with you in that regard. In eastern Kentucky, in my district, we've been working on a regional community development initiative known as Shaping Our Appalachian Region, SOAR, to help my area, which has been hit hard with the loss of over 10,000 mining jobs since the president took office. One program that provides a true benefit to struggling regions like mine is the Community Development Block Grant Program. Incredibly popular and effective because it provides flexibility to address unique community development needs from town to town, county to county. And these dollars are often leveraged over many times to carry out projects that otherwise would never get off the ground. In my rural district, small communities have also utilized these funds to help create jobs through the expansion and retention of businesses. Because of the significant impact this program has in my region and across the country, I was disappointed to see the cuts proposed in the administration's budget proposal. I would be remiss if I didn't mention my concern over the Self-Help Homeownership Opportunity Program, SHOP. For the past few years, the administration has recommended moving SHOP into the Home Partnership Program, and Congress has repeatedly kept it as its own line item. This year, again, you propose moving it under Home. This program allows low-income home buyers to contribute significant amounts of their own sweat equity toward the construction or rehab of their homes. This allows many low-income families the otherwise out-of-reach opportunity to own their own home and provide their children with a safe and sanitary place to live and play and grow. The huge impact this program has across the country justifies it remaining an independent program. So, Mr. Secretary, we look forward to working through the budget process with you these next few months. We want to be helpful. We appreciate the service that you're giving your country, and we look forward to working with you. I yield.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Also, great privilege to recognize the ranking member of the full committee, Ms. Lowy.
And thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I want to join my colleagues in welcoming you, Secretary Castro. Thank you for joining us today. Mr. Secretary, HUD's budget request does include some bright spots, including $20.8 billion for tenant-based rental assistance, a 6.2% increase over FY 2016, $200 million for the Choice Neighborhoods Initiative, a $75 million or 60% increase over FY 2016, and $88 million for a new program that would fund 10,000 new vouchers for homeless families with children. These increases are essential for these programs to keep pace with actual needs. However, I was disappointed by not only a 1% decrease in HUD's overall budget, a $328 million decrease from FY 2016, but also some significant cuts to programs that our constituents depend on, like a $200 million cut to the Community Development Block Grant Program. The request also flat funds the home program at $950 million, as well as the lead, hazard control, and healthy homes programs at $110 million, with $83 million for lead, hazard control grants and $25 million for the Healthy Homes program, respectively. This funding, as you heard from my colleague and the ranking member, is just not adequate or sufficient to meet our country's actual housing needs. Lead hazard control has made huge strides in eliminating household toxins that affect our communities, resulting in lower lead poisoning rates and better educational and behavioral outcomes for children. Work remains to remove lead from the homes of millions of families. Now is not the time to flat fund it. Many communities throughout the country lack adequate, safe, affordable housing for all income levels. The housing sector must play a big role in strengthening and growing the middle class, empowering hardworking families, and providing economic opportunity for all Americans. I look forward to working with you, Secretary Castro, and to listening to your testimony today. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, Ms. Lowy. Mr. Secretary, your full written testimony will be included in the record, and so with that, you are recognized for 5 minutes. Thank you again for being here.
He's strong.
Thank you very much, Chairman Diaz-Balart, to Ranking Member Price, to Chairman Rogers, Ranking Member Lowy, and members of the subcommittee. Thank you for inviting me to discuss HUD's proposed budget for fiscal year 2017. Our request honors the President's commitment to provide more Americans with the chance to secure quality and affordable housing, and to use housing as a platform that sparks greater opportunity in people's lives. This proposal comes at a time of tremendous momentum for the American economy. The unemployment rate has been cut in half since 2009. Over the past 71 months, businesses have added 14 million jobs, the longest streak of private sector job growth in our nation's history. Now, we must ensure that this progress reaches every corner of our nation, and expanding housing opportunity is a vital part of this mission. Today, 1/4 of American renters spend more than half their incomes on housing, and for every dollar that goes toward a rent payment, one is taken from a family's grocery budget, a child's education, or a couple's retirement savings. That's why the President's budget calls for increasing HUD's funding to $48.9 billion, $1.9 billion over the enacted level for fiscal year 2016. 85% of our budget would go solely toward renewing rental assistance for nearly 5.5 million households. But we've also taken strong steps to maximize our remaining resources. Investments that would support our nation's most underserved communities and empower more hardworking Americans to lift themselves into the middle class. 6 years ago, the President set forth a bold vision to end homelessness in America. And since then, we've made great strides. The best example of this, a 36% decline in veteran homelessness between 2010 and 2015. I want to thank the members of this committee for funding HUD-VASH over the years, and with your support, we can fully achieve the President's vision and help the next generation to escape the cycle of homelessness. HUD's Family Options Study offers clear evidence that rapid rehousing and housing choice vouchers are the most effective solutions for families with children experiencing homelessness. So we've asked for a historic $11 billion investment in mandatory spending over the next 10 years that would use these tools to assist approximately 550,000 families. This budget also reinforces HUD's commitment to empowering more Americans through housing mobility. We've requested $20.9 billion for our Housing Choice Voucher Program, an increase of $1.2 billion from the enacted level for fiscal year 2016. This would provide 2.2 million low-income families with the chance to move into neighborhoods with better schools, safer streets, and more jobs, and stay there for the long term. But HUD's mission also extends beyond housing mobility. Too many communities remain segregated by race and by income, and too many Americans see their futures limited by the zip code where they were born. And HUD's proposed budget reflects our duty to revitalize underserved communities. Our rental assistance demonstration program has already leveraged nearly $2 billion for crucial repairs in public housing and other HUD-assisted properties. And we've asked Congress for $50 million to make targeted investments in 25,000 new units and to eliminate the remaining cap on the number of units eligible for RAD conversion. We've also requested $2.8 billion for the Community Development Block Grant Program, which improves infrastructure, rehabilitates housing, and creates jobs for folks of modest means, and $200 million for Choice Neighborhoods, which helps to transform areas of concentrated poverty by creating quality mixed-income housing, improving public safety, and sparking neighborhood small business growth. Finally, the President knows that many Native American communities face substandard living conditions and significant barriers to economic opportunity. So this budget requests $780 million to improve housing and development on tribal lands, including $20 million for Native youth programs like community centers, health clinics, and Head Start facilities. The President's budget reflects his determination to promote inclusive opportunity for all Americans. And I look forward to working with this committee to build a future where every American can live in a home that offers them pride, progress, and hope. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Secretary. We will proceed in the standard 5-minute rounds, alternating sides, recognizing members in order of seniority as they were seated at the beginning of the hearing. And as always, please be mindful that of your time and allow Secretary Castro the time to answer within that 5-minute period. Mr. Secretary, as I alluded to, I mentioned in my opening statement, the HUD Office of Inspector General had to express a disclaimer on HUD's 2014 and 2015 financial statements. The IG found billions of dollars improperly accounted for at CPD and tens of billions in audit problems at Ginnie Mae. Mr. Secretary, it's bad enough. It would be bad enough if it was 1 year, but it's frankly terrifying that a financial institution as important as HUD can't get a clean bill of health from its auditors 2 years in a row. So if you could, sir, as simply as you can you just explain what's going on with HUD's financials?
Yeah. Thank you very much for the question, Chairman. The audit that you're talking about is one that, of course, we take very seriously. Let me begin by saying that we have a close working relationship with our Inspector General. We meet on a regular basis, and this is, of course, one of the items that we have been working on together. You're correct that we had a disclaimer in 2014 and in 2015. I'm pleased to tell you that Ginnie Mae has been working with the Inspector General, with GAO, to take several steps to improve that situation. It has filled key leadership positions. It has revamped several of its processes, improved the way that it does business. I also want to assure you that I have made it very clear to all of my staff that we take the recommendations of the Inspector General seriously. In fact, I know that y'all are going to have an opportunity to meet with the Inspector General soon, and he and I meet on a regular basis. It's fair to say that there are very few instances at HUD, whether it's this audit or others, where we are out of sync with the Inspector General. And in those instances where there is a difference of opinion, there's a concrete reason for it. So in 2014, we had 11 material weaknesses in our audit. In 2015, we brought that down to 9 material weaknesses. We believe that in 2016 that we'll be able to bring that down further. We're making progress, and we'll continue to work with the Inspector General, with GAO and others to improve our systems and ensure that the audit improves as well.
And Mr. Secretary, HUD is operating for now several months without a permanent CFO. Any idea when you think that might be, that critical position might be filled by somebody who can, again, address these issues?
You bring up an issue that we have been working on. This is something that our Deputy Secretary herself has been attentive to, and we very much are working toward filling that position. We believe that it's important. I don't want to give a timeline right now in the sense of, we believe that in the next several months, but hopefully sooner, that position will be filled. It's something that we've been working on, have not been able to fill yet, but continue to work diligently on.
Mr. Secretary, the first in, first out, the improper use of that, FIFO accounting is one of the biggest reasons, right, for the IG audit disclaimer. And it appears HUD is violating statutory requirements under the home program because of this faulty accounting. Even worse, the IG believes these accounting mistakes meet the definition of an Anti-Deficiency Act violation, which is, would mean that you're frankly spending money that you don't have. And have you been able to investigate, have you investigated the IG's findings to determine whether HUD's breach is in fact, breach of the home statute, is in fact an Anti-Deficiency Act violation?
We, over the last year, in fact, have reported from the past 14 separate Anti-Deficiency Act violations that HUD had engaged in the past. In an effort to get beyond those, we've improved our processes so that we don't encounter Anti-Deficiency Act violations in the future. In fact, I think that it's fair to say that today, in 2016, the challenge at the end of the year is often, at the end of the fiscal year, is often trying to ensure that money that has been appropriated is spent. Because of the Anti-Deficiency Act situations that were encountered in the past, many of our program areas are shy about spending toward the end of the fiscal year. And so we're improving our processes so that we both hit our mark but do not commit an Anti-Deficiency Act violation. I'd be glad to get you more information on the specific one that you're talking about.
Greatly appreciate that, Mr. Secretary. And again, sticking to the time limit, Mr. Price, you recognize, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, let me ask you about, I'm sorry, yes. I'm reminded that our ranking member of the full committee has another engagement, and I'm to yield to her. So before I run my mouth any further, let me...
That is a good thing for you to remember.
It is a good thing to remember. Ms. Lowy.
We have a partnership here, and I know the chairman and I need roller skates these days. There are about 5 or 6 hearings a day, but you're very gracious. Thank you so much, and thank you again for your testimony, Mr. Secretary. Mr. Secretary, the criminal incompetence that resulted in tens of thousands of American citizens in Flint consuming lead-contaminated water is shocking. Historically, lead paint has been the most widespread source of lead exposure. Much of the success we've had in reducing exposure to lead hazard has come from a partnership between HUD, the EPA, and the CDC, each providing expertise and resources. However, over the past few years, funding for the lead hazard control and healthy homes programs has been flat funded at $110 million, with $83 million for lead hazard control grants and $25 million for the Healthy Homes program, respectively, down from $140 million just 5 years ago. And we know the job has not been done. With millions of American homes still containing lead-based paint, I'm concerned that your budget just does not address the serious need. Are the resources that have been provided in this bill sufficient to fund the need for this program? For instance, how many grant applicants are turned away due to the lack of funding? How does the department prioritize who receives these grants? And what other sources of funds are available to remove lead paint from homes?
Thank you very much for your focus on this, Ms. Lowy. Appreciate it very much. You're of course right that what happened in Flint was a real shame. At the same time, we know that this administration, has marshaled a lot of resources to try and do what we can to address the needs of the residents of Flint. HUD, in fact, is involved in that response and has actually had somebody as part of the Strong Cities, Strong Communities program on the ground in Flint for over a year. But let me just address more specifically your questions. I wish that I could say that the resources that HUD has received in the past met all the needs. As you heard earlier in testimony, I believe that we're able to serve about half of the eligible applicants in the program, the Lead Hazard Control Program. In fiscal year 2015, there were 47 eligible applications, about $141 million of requests that went unfunded. So you're correct that the need outstrips the resources that we have. There are other resources aside from this grant that can be used to address lead issues. One of those, for instance, is CDBG, Community Development Block Grants can be used. They're flexible funding. I wish that I could give you the impression that these resources can meet that need. They cannot. It's true that we've had to make tough choices in the budget. And as I mentioned in my testimony, 85% of our budget request is re-upping what the folks who we are already serving. And what that has done over time is put more and more of a crunch on everything else, whether it's been CDBG or lead hazard control grants, but not because we don't believe that these are worthy initiatives. We continually look for more ways to make these resources go further, for instance, whether through reaching out to philanthropic organizations or providing technical assistance to local and state communities. You also asked about the process itself. Of course, it's a competitive process, and so in terms of prioritizing, we look for those communities that have the greatest need and also put together compelling plans on how they would address lead-based paint in that community.
Now, you have about 56. Maybe we should talk about the Healthy Homes program another time, because you've been so gracious to give me the time, and I thank you. And thank you, Mr. Secretary. I appreciate it. I look forward to working together.
Thank you, Ms. Lowy, again, for being so considerate with your time. It's greatly appreciated. Chairman Rogers.
Mr. Price, I don't think he got to finish his. I don't think you finished.
I'll take the turn that Ms. Lowy would have. That's fine.
Well, Mr. Secretary, last year, the HUD Inspector General published an audit that found that there are more than 25,000 high-income earners living in public housing. These over-income families are taking up very valuable spaces, while over 500,000 qualified families are stuck on a waiting list. The IG estimated that taxpayers will shell out over $104 million a year to keep these people in public housing that are not qualified, that they're making more money than allowed. What's being done to check that?
Yes, thank you, Chairman Rogers, for the question. Of course, this did receive a lot of attention, and I want to let you know very plainly that this is a concern that we share. I'm pleased to report that we're working hand in hand with the Inspector General to address this issue. And so we've done three things. First, on September 3rd of last year, we sent a letter to all public housing authorities strongly encouraging them to adopt policies that would transition out extremely over-income individuals like some of the ones that were highlighted in the Inspector General's report. On September 8th, Just a few days later, we published the fiscal year 2015 flat rent notice, which is going to result in a rent increase for most families paying flat rent and may lead them to choose market rate housing, give them that extra incentive to move on. And on February 3rd of this year, we published an advance notice of proposed rulemaking seeking public comments on a potential new rule to strengthen oversight of over-income tenancy in public housing and to ensure that people residing in public housing continue to need housing assistance from HUD after admission. And this may be the most important part of our response. This advanced notice of proposed rulemaking gives us the opportunity to seek feedback and to ensure that we go forward with a rule that will address the concerns the Inspector General raised. If I may, the last thing I would just briefly say is that while I do agree that these housing authorities need to be tougher, especially in the cases that were highlighted in the report, I think through our conversations with the Hill, with I think the staffs of different congressional representatives, also as reflected in Chairman Luetkemeier's bill 3700, there is some nuance to this. Because sometimes you have hardworking folks that barely get over that income limit. They become self-sufficient. They may fall backward for a period of time. You also want to encourage folks to work their way up so that they can get up and out. And so we do need to set this policy in a way that makes sense so that you're encouraging them to work harder and you know, increase their pay so they can move out, but not cut them off the second that they do that, and disincentivize them from actually getting a pay raise and becoming self-sufficient. So there is some nuance in here, and I think that's reflected in the legislation that's being considered and the conversations that we've had, and we hope that that'll be reflected as well in the final rule.
Is 25,000 a fair figure?
The Inspector General did find just over 25,000 out of 1.1 million public housing units, yes.
Yeah. But you have no argument with the number?
We don't have any argument with that number. What I would point out, though, is that the vast majority of those were barely over the income limit, and some of them fall out of the income limit and back into the income limit. And this is, I think, what we need to address successfully in crafting a rule. And we welcome the feedback of members of this committee, and also have been enjoyed working with others who have asked, including Chairman Luetkemeyer and his staff.
What's the timetable for the new practice?
For which part?
The new rule that you're talking about.
We anticipate that we've done the advanced notice of proposed rulemaking, and so the next step will be a notice of proposed rulemaking later in 2016, and I anticipate that in 2017 we would have a final rule.
Well, I understand your point about not cutting them off the next minute, but that income rule is there for a very real reason. And there's 500,000 qualified families, according to the Inspector General, waiting to move in that are qualified under the income level. So it's not fair to them. You agree?
No, you and I, we don't have a disagreement there. And that's why, as you can see from these steps, we've moved forthrightly on this to address it.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Price, you're recognized, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, let's turn to the Choice Neighborhoods Initiative. This is a program that transforms aging public housing developments into vibrant communities. It's a unique program in the HUD portfolio in terms of its reach and scope. It builds on the success of the Hope 6 program, which I know firsthand made a dramatic impact, particularly in Raleigh, our capital city in North Carolina. Congress has provided funding for Choice Neighborhoods since fiscal 2010. I, of course, have been proud to support it, but want to ask you to reflect on how we can improve this program, what kind of success we've had so far. I wonder if you would cite particular successes, either now or for the record. Are there particular cities, communities that demonstrate how choice neighborhoods can work and how, in your view, it should work. Secondly, how close are we coming to meeting the demand for this program, the meritorious applications that would make good use of these funds? How many applicants apply for each round of implementation grants? How many were awarded? What's the level of meritorious applications not awarded? Can you give us just some sense of what kind of demand you're dealing with?
Yep.
Also, with the implementation grants, which is what we're mainly interested in here, the grants that actually carry out the transformation we're talking about, what kind of success have you had and have grantees had in leveraging outside funding to supplement this? That's a hallmark of many HUD programs, of course, and I wonder how it works here. And then finally, if you could address the smaller grants, of course, they're much more numerous, the planning grants, much smaller, much more numerous. Talk about how that's working, what kind of outcomes you've seen there. Some presumably lead to implementation grants, but all cannot. There's no way all those planning grants could lead to a full implementation grant. So what do they lead to? I mean, what kind of evidence you have about the kind of leverage the planning grants give? And what have we seen there in terms of the ability, even if a community doesn't get an implementation grant, the ability to carry forward after the planning grant and nonetheless get support for serious work?
Thank you for your past support and your vocal support of Choice Neighborhoods. The value of Choice Neighborhoods really is that it's place-based work and it's breaking through silos. So as you know, building on Hope 6, this says it's not just about housing, it's also about housing and transforming a neighborhood. What can you do on housing and transportation, housing and education, housing and the availability of fresh food, and housing and the environmental conditions around the housing. A couple of good examples of this. I visited a neighborhood in Boston. I believe the name was Roxbury, in Roxbury Heights, but I'll check that. And they were one of the first Choice Neighborhood Implementation Grant recipients. They revamped their public housing, including mixed income. And close to the public housing site, they also have an incubator that works on incubating small food-related businesses. So budding caterers and other folks who sell actually packaged food are able to take up space there and grow their business. It's helping to improve that neighborhood in Boston. A second example is the Woodlawn neighborhood in Chicago, which is not too far from the University of Chicago. They have partnered up there with the University of Chicago, for instance, to help provide some safety, police protection. They've included recreational activities for young people and also opportunities for seniors. And they've done it in a way that is great because, again, it's not just about providing housing, but it's also about improving quality of life. You asked about leveraging of other dollars. Maybe the best example of this is that in New Orleans, for instance, in the first phase of a build-out of the Choice Neighborhood Implementation Grant that they got for the housing, at the end of the day, only 16% of those funds came from that Choice Neighborhood Grant. So obviously they were able to leverage a series of other types of financing to get that housing done. The planning grants, which traditionally have been $500,000 planning grants, are important, and a number of those planning grantees have become implementation grantees, although, as you say, not all of them, but they have been a good base from which those communities have either successfully gotten implementation grants. A good example of this was San Antonio, my hometown, or they've been able to leverage philanthropic support or other types of grants, maybe not from HUD or sometimes from HUD.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Mr. Joyce, you're recognized, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon, Mr. Secretary. Good afternoon. Prior to my arrival here, I was a prosecuting attorney for 25 years in Geauga County. And one of my chief duties, obviously, was the responsibility to represent the county and the planning commission and the townships in how we adapted to local zoning. I got to tell you, I have great concern with your affirmatively furthering fair housing rule, or AFFH rule, and what it means for my constituency. By enforcing the rule, you and your department are using your authority like a hammer, and you're robbing our communities of their rightful say in local zoning laws. This has caused great concern throughout my district and is what I believe one of the grossest current examples of government overreach. I'd like to take a few moments, if we could, to examine this rule and how, in the eyes of your department, it is equipped to fundamentally restructure our unique communities. To begin, which area of the budget does your department plan to utilize for research and gathering the opinions of local stakeholders?
Are you referring to the work that we've already done or the work that's going to be done as part of each community's assessment of fair housing and as it's rolled out now?
Yes, as you're going forward, where in the budget do you have that plan to take into consideration that the community's concerns?
As you probably know, PHAs are able to use operating funds. There may be local or state resources that they're able to use, and so there are a number of potential funding streams that they could use.
Okay. Now, how is your department's research process structured so that its data establishes an accurate and thorough level of knowledge of each of the local community's wants and needs, and who will ultimately execute the AFFH programming from the federal level?
Yeah, thanks a lot for that question. This is an important one. This is being done, the process has been done jointly. This has really been a collaboration across HUD to make sure that we get it right. Because historically within HUD, there has been this tension between our Fair Housing Office sometimes and our Community Planning and Development. In other words, CPD giving out the grants and then Fair Housing sometimes clamping down, having to clamp down because of non-compliance with the Fair Housing Act. So in order to get this right, we went out and got input from local communities. That was a part of the process. And then internally at HUD, each of these program areas work together also with our policy development and research group. So you asked about the data, for instance, and the tools that we're going to give them. That was a collaborative process. On December 31st of last year, our tool effectively went out to these communities that are the 22 communities that are in the first round of respondents for AFFH. It's the latest data. It's more specific than they've ever had. It's more comprehensive than they've ever had. And I'd also just want to point out, Congressman, because you ask a question that I think a lot of people are asking. Sure. And there is this impression among some folks that HUD is going to be very prescriptive. You know, we can't tell a local jurisdiction you have to adopt this zoning law or planning law or land use restriction. That is not what AFFH is about. It's about giving these communities the data that they need to make prudent decisions about how they invest these federal taxpayer dollars and how they also live up to the Fair Housing Act requirements. But we're not telling them specifically you have to do this here or else. We cannot do that under the law.
To be specific, though, can you give me an example where this research process has already been employed and touch upon its level of accuracy?
Yeah, actually, there was a pilot program that touched, I want to say it was about 30 communities that was a kind of precursor to AFFH, where communities drew up these plans with data and stated their own kind of aspirations along fair housing lines, and also how they connect the dots of housing and transit and general quality of life. And so we have a good set of about 30 communities that went through this. There was a benefit to those communities. There was also a benefit to HUD in getting to see that process and understand how we can provide good data to these communities and then let them lead the effort to come up with their plan. We do not intend to come up with a plan for them. This is going to be a locally driven effort to come up with these plans.
Thank you. I see I've exceeded my time limit, Mr. Chairman, so I will pass it back to you.
Thank you very much, sir. Mr. Quigley, you're recognized, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon, Mr. Secretary. Let's go back to lead paint in my hometown, Chicago. As you're aware, we have a lot of incidents relating to Section 8 housing and lead-based exposure. Since 2012, there are about 178 children that we know of that have experienced elevated blood lead levels. Two thoughts on that. I believe under the current department regulations, the lead-based paint standard for public housing is 4 times the CDC recommended level. Are we working to adjust that through rulemaking or some other process?
Yeah, you're correct, and we are working with OMB on that. We don't have anything to announce now, but that is something that is on our radar screen and we're working toward. But let me just say as well that since fiscal year 2013, that every notice of funding availability for lead assistance grants has recommended the CDC definition of elevated blood lead levels. And so in the work that's being done out there, much of that reflects the CDC definition, even though you're correct that right now there is a discrepancy between the CDC definition and HUD, and we would like to bring that into conformance.
And I appreciate that. Also, I understand that the housing agencies are required to inspect the premises before people move in, and something like a year after that as well. But as far as I understand, that's about the only way they're determining whether there may be lead-based paint issues. Is there something else we can do to determine the level of risk out there?
Yeah, well, certainly the communities that are part of our lead hazard control grants are those who have identified issues in their public housing or other housing. So they are affirmatively addressing these issues and remediating them. Along with our Healthy Homes funding, it often helps to improve the overall health of that household. But we're always looking for ways that we can be more effective in the future, and so we'd love to follow up with you on that.
Yeah, I'd like to work with your folks in Chicago as well. The second point, as you know, LGBT youth have an extraordinarily high rate of housing instability and homelessness, more than the general population. And transgender Americans are the hardest hit, with 1 in 5 transgender Americans experiencing homelessness. On behalf of the LGBT Equality Caucus, we want to thank you and support you for your proposed rule dealing with this issue. It's a crucial step forward in ensuring transgender people seeking emergency housing and shelter are able to find the protection they need. How do you plan to implement this rule? Are there specific issues you're going to have to address?
First, thanks for the recognition on the effort. We believe that this is important. As you know, beginning in 2012, with our equal access rule, we started to address concrete issues that present themselves to the LGBT community when they seek housing and shelter. This rule addresses the responsibility of shelters and single-sex facilities. That is in process right now, and this is something that we're working to get done during this administration. And once it's rolled out, it's also clear that it's going to take, I believe, quite a bit of partnership with local communities and providers to ensure that this rule is implemented smoothly. But I believe that you know, just as the rest of the equal access rule has been, that we can do that.
Yeah, I think some of this is going to be your help in working with communities in these shelters on education and some training, understanding specific issues here and how to help people who are at their most vulnerable point.
No, I agree.
Well, thank you so much for your service.
Thank you, Mr. Quigley. Mr. Yoder, you're recognized, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, welcome back to the committee. I noted that you were in Kansas City earlier this year, and I represent Kansas City, Kansas, amongst other places, and you were there to talk about Connect Home. And I appreciate you coming to our area. I wanted to just talk to you about a little bit about that program. You know, Google Fiber came to Kansas City and provided a real opportunity. We're one of the first communities in the country to have this high-speed internet. And one of the challenges that quickly arose is that we have a digital divide, and we have citizens, low-income families that have no access to the internet, significant portions. And so, I guess I just wanted to hear from you: how big is this a challenge across the country? It's certainly a challenge in my community. How much of this is a priority for your agency, and what can we do in terms of public-private partnerships to really resolve some of these discrepancies. And I think, this is one of those areas that ought to be bipartisan in particular, because this is a bottleneck on access to opportunity. And if we're serious about giving people the tools to succeed in this country, giving them the levers to rise out of poverty, if they don't have access to the internet, it makes it that much more challenging for them. So I wanted to turn that over to you and hear your thoughts on those questions.
Yeah, I appreciate the opportunity to speak to something that I agree with you. I believe ought to be bipartisan, as other issues have been before this committee, and is that we're very proud of. Number one, this is a great example of a public-private partnership. All but $50,000 of this effort is being invested by the private sector, internet service providers, and nonprofits. Connect Home is an effort to connect up residents of public housing in 28 communities, 27 urban communities, and 1 tribal community, the Choctaw Nation in Oklahoma, to the internet, because the vast majority aren't connected now. And Google Fiber, as well as Sprint, which is right there in Kansas City area, are great participants in this. And the idea is that we believe that that folks of modest means need 21st century tools in order to compete in this 21st century global economy, and if we expect them to become self-sufficient. This effort will connect up to 200,000 children, and we're actively now working toward expanding that. In this budget, we've requested, because remember, right now, it's only been $50,000 plus the staff time that's been devoted to this. We're requesting $5 million toward Connect Home for those instances where just with a little bit of a public investment, we might be able to get a community hooked up, because we think that those dollars can go very, very far. And the fact is that almost all of this has been private sector so far. At the end of the day, I believe that this is going to mean that we avoid more intergenerational poverty in communities in the United States, so that those kids, especially that do get an internet connection, they're more likely to be able to do their homework and apply for college, and working age folks who can apply for a job. You're gonna improve their upward mobility through this internet connection.
Appreciate your leadership there, and appreciate you coming to my community and highlighting that as an important investment for helping children rise out of poverty. I want to turn your attention to your proposal to support the administrative support fee on the FHA lenders again. And I'm pleased to see that it has a sunset clause this year. I have a few questions about how it's to be implemented. Congress, first of all, has rejected this proposal, so I'm not necessarily pleased to see it back, but I do have some questions about how you suggest it would be implemented. First of all, I think it says that it would be charged on a prospective basis, but then in your budget it also says mortgages that were insured under this title during the previous fiscal year. So is this prospective or retroactive? And can you explain the disparity?
Well, it's prospective from when it's enacted, but the fee will be assessed at one point in the year, at the end of the year, or at some point in the year. So I think that's what's being described. I don't think that I've seen the text that you're looking at, but I believe that's what's being described. But it is going to be on transactions going forward. It's not going to be going backward.
I think it states the fee would be calculated based on mortgages that were insured under this title during the previous fiscal year.
That's right. But if we started it tomorrow, then the fee would be assessed after that 1 year, and it's talking about going backward to capture everything after it was enacted.
Also, under your proposal, it says small lenders, I think, would get hit with a pretty hefty fee because of the complexity of the formula. And I have just two questions here. One, where you base the fees on lenders' prior years of business, wouldn't it be a whole lot easier just to assess like a nominal fee directly on the mortgage at the time it's made, like the USDA has proposed? And then just lastly, your request is for $30 million, but you also say that the fee could be as much as 4 basis points. FHA is projecting to do $200 billion in business next year, so if the math is right, 4 basis points would be $80 million, or about $250,000 over the 3-year life of the provision. What are you going to do with this money, and is this the right number, and which is it?
Yeah, good question. We've actually said between 2 and 4 basis points now as a recognition of this figure that you cited. And so we're also aware of the USDA's approach. It's a little bit of a different approach. And we did give thought to that. We actually believe that this and one of the reasons we pursued this is because we thought that it might be more manageable to smaller lenders. As for what it would fund, this $30 million would fund investment in our IT and ensuring that our risk management is as strong as possible. So, we're confident that that this would help us be a stronger organization at FHA, that it would directly relate to the ability to work with lenders effectively.
Thank you,
for
Mr.
them to
Secretary.
understand how they stand in comparison to their peers. And this is, I think, the third year that we're asking for this, but during this time, we very much have reached out to the industry and worked with them in terms of taking suggestions. That's why you see the change, that it's prospective, that it's limited to 3 years, that it has a sliding scale of what it could be in terms of the basis points. All of that is in response to feedback that we've gotten.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Mr. Cuellar.
Let me ask you about, first of all, welcome, Mr. Secretary. Good seeing you again. Let me ask you about colonias. I think you're very familiar with colonias. Those are the third world condition places that we have along the border. No water, no sewage. Housing is something that's needed. Sometimes they don't even have electricity also. It's in the United States. We added some language through the help of the chairman and the ranking member to make sure that the colonias were specifically eligible for the self-help home ownership opportunity program. Could you tell us what your plan is for the colonias, number one, and then after that, if you can talk a little bit about your upward mobility project also. I think that's the CDBG money administered by HUD and HSS, and see what your work is or what your vision is on that also. So it's the upward mobility and then colonias.
Okay. Thank you, Representative Cuellar, and good to see a fellow Texan.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, we have in this budget, we're making a request that we made last year, and we really do believe that this would help serve our colonias better. As you know, there are colonias, a couple of thousand of them, over 4 states, Texas, New Mexico, Arizona, and California. And currently, there's a 10% CDBG set aside for colonias in those 4 states. What we're asking for in this fiscal year 2017 budget is that we take that up to 15%, but that it still be at the discretion of those states.
Yeah, and let me emphasize, because I did ask for that, I'm going to ask the chairman again. This year, it's only given the authorization for the states, if, let's say the state of Texas, New Mexico, Arizona, California, if they so desire, they can go up to that.
That's right. Right now, 3 of the states, only California, but the rest is not, but the rest of them are already maxed out at that 10%. Right. And so this would give them authority to go up to 15%. And as you mentioned, these colonias, oftentimes in these states, these are the neediest communities by far in these states, with conditions that require a tremendous amount of attention in terms of infrastructure, in terms of housing, and so forth. And we believe that this is a modest but important measure that would help improve the quality of life there. As to your other question, this is the second year that we're proposing an upward mobility initiative. So the idea behind this is that we want to give our grantees, our CDBG grantees and home grantees, as much flexibility as possible. And the Upward Mobility Initiative would allow up to 10 communities, states or localities, to combine 4 sources of funding, CDBG and home from HUD, as well as social service block grants and community service block grants from HHS. As a pilot project going forward, allow them to combine those funds for the allowable uses and basically be able to get a bigger bang for the buck. On top of that, we're requesting $300 million in mandatory appropriation for investments in communities that would allow that flexibility, so further proactive investments along those lines. And I believe that this is one way that we're trying to fill this gap that was spoken of in terms of CDBG. That it would be an excellent way to see what some of these communities can do when we further give them flexibility and have a good impact.
All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Cuellar. Mr. Young, you recognize, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Welcome, Secretary.
Thank you.
I want to talk about a Des Moines Register op-ed that was in their paper last summer. Maybe you've not seen it, but there are a few issues in there that you've probably heard about regarding some waste and fraud and abuse. And it published several issues are highlighted, including an administrator who was sent to prison for facilitating a $1.5 million government loan in return for nearly $40,000 in kickbacks, but was never disciplined and allowed to retire. Another concern raised as a HUD employee kept on the payroll for 19 months after he was jailed on charges of stalking, threatening to kill, and accessing HUD computers to obtain information on his victims. I raise these issues because we share the same goal of ensuring that funding for HUD is spent on the most vulnerable in our communities who are in really difficult situations, and as the editorial states, and we'll get you a copy of this, quote, every tax dollar lost to waste, fraud, abuse, and incompetence is a dollar not spent providing shelter for the poor and those who need it. Can you comment on what steps HUD is taking to address these types of serious personnel problems, prevent them in the future, and increase accountability for taxpayers? In other words, how does this happen, and how do we get to keeping our eye on this and making sure that this doesn't happen again?
Yeah, I appreciate the opportunity to address that, and I had not seen that editorial, but look forward to taking a look at it. Number one, we're setting a culture of accountability at HUD. One of the first things that I did within, I believe it was the first month that I was there, maybe the first couple of weeks, was to send out a joint letter with the Inspector General that went out to all employees, encouraging them to collaborate with the Inspector General on any types of reviews or investigations that are happening, and make sure that we have a positive working relationship so that we can root out more issues like this. Secondly, we have increased our training for employees, including ethics training, so that employees understand the standard that we expect them to hold themselves to and that we will hold them to. Third, as I mentioned earlier in my testimony, we are in step with our Inspector General on the overwhelming majority of recommendations that he has made, and we're taking implementation of those recommendations seriously. Fourth is we're trying to improve our hiring process so that we get the best and the brightest from the beginning. We have, I would say that these instances that you point out are an aberration. The vast majority of HUD employees are honest, hardworking people. But we also believe that we want to always improve as an organization. And so one of the things that we're trying to do is improve hiring. We recently partnered, for instance, with Toyota, who came in and worked with our hiring folks to improve the hiring plan process. And we continue to work through the hiring process in general so that we can get the best folks available out there. And we're working with our employees to engage them and provide an organization that listens to them, I think, more effectively so that they feel more engaged, and the good ones are likely to stay on longer. Because of that, our employee viewpoint survey scores went up significantly this year. HUD was the most improved mid-size agency. So we're doing all of those things and others to try and create a HUD that is stronger, that is more responsive, and is more likely to avoid some of the individual instances that you pointed out.
Certainly appreciate that, and I don't mean to infer that we only hear the bad things that happen out there on the news, and so many positive things are happening as well with your employees. So thank you for instituting the ethics training and the personnel programs. Finally, I want to comment on VASH, the Veterans Affairs Supportive Housing. You mentioned that early on in your testimony about a 36% decline in veterans homelessness. That's great. Can you talk about how you come up with that data and track that issue?
And then I noticed in your budget request, you're really asking only for $7 million for VASH, and that's really for tribal justification only. And my concern with that is that an inference that we don't have a veterans homelessness problem?
And let me answer that part first. That's an important question, of course. It is not. Number one, other resources that we're dedicating serve veterans as well. So, for instance, when we request, as we are in this budget, additional resources for housing choice vouchers, for permanent supportive housing, for rapid rehousing, all of those impact veterans. The lack of a request this year for VASH is a recognition that we believe, with regard to VASH vouchers, that we have the resources we need to address the challenge of veteran homelessness there, as VASH vouchers can. We were proud to begin tribal HUD VASH. In fact, we awarded the first series of allocations in December of 2015. We see a continuing need there. Let me just, again, thank the committee on both sides of the aisle, because I tell folks in public all the time that this really is an instance where I think things worked out the way that they should on behalf of veterans. The resources have been appropriated. HUD and the VA have been working with local communities to get these vouchers on the street. And I have to say, the teams that work on this are probably the most active and passionate teams in either agency for obvious reasons. And they've
Mr.
improved
Secretary,
the
I'm going to
process.
have to, on that note, I'm going to have to.
Okay, they've improved the
I start winding
process, and you know, we look forward to continue to drive down that number.
We'll have further conversations. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Absolutely. No, thank you, Mr. Young. Mr. Secretary, the FIFO issue is a major problem, and we kind of talked about this before. It makes it impossible for you to deliver auditable financials, and even worse, it is causing HUD to violate federal law. So can I have a firm commitment from you that this accounting problem will be corrected in time for your 2016 audit?
Well, I can tell you that we are working with the GAO on this issue right now, as well as with the IG. You're right that it is an accounting issue. We don't believe that we're violating the ADA on it, but I can pledge to you that we will work diligently with the GAO and the IG on this to resolve it.
And again, Mr. Secretary, you know, I want to work with you. This is a hugely important issue. So you know, let's just make sure that we focus on that. And I'm obviously willing to work with you to be helpful.
Will do.
To be helpful. You are requesting. Let me go to the administrative fee area. Excuse me. You're requesting $2.1 billion for administrative fees, a $427 million increase, which is a 26% increase above last year. Now, we all understand the importance of supporting public housing authorities so that they can efficiently run their programs. But does it really make sense to ask for such a, I mean, it's a huge increase to the administrative account?
Yeah, this is an issue that I believe goes to how we can ensure that we have a housing choice voucher program that is more efficient, that is stronger, serves all of those voucher holders better. The fact is that over the last several years, we have only dedicated about, let's say, between 70 and 80% of the admin fee that ought to have been dedicated, appropriated to housing authorities. What's changed is that we undertook an admin fee study to understand what was the appropriate level that we ought to be investing for the administration of these vouchers. And based on that, we have made this request to increase the admin fee. This is important for housing authorities because over the years, they've been asked to do more and more with less and less. And we believe this is the right level of funding to ensure that this is a well-run program. And it's a very big program, and it's an important one, and we want to make sure they have the resources to get it right so that we avoid bigger problems in the future.
Sure, but I see that the HUD has had a really, frankly, and that's a good thing, has had a fair amount of success leasing up units. And PHAs have been able to lease up nearly all of the available units in the voucher program in the past 2 years. So, and again, I don't want to punish you for your success. But if you're, the question is, I guess it begs the question, if you are meeting your leasing milestones, and then why the need for more administrative overhead?
Well, I would just say the resources out there for administration are stretched very thin with these housing authorities. And so, they've done a commendable job in many instances of trying to stretch those resources as far as possible. I also understand, of course, in the budget environment that we're in, this kind of expense is probably not the first thing that folks think about, but it is tremendously important that we adequately resource these housing authorities so that they can continue to do a good job and get even better in the administration of the program.
My understanding is that you're developing, but you have not yet implemented your new administrative fee structure. So wouldn't it make sense to hold the line on spending for this account until you've actually finalized the new administrative fee formula?
We believe that we do know the best approach based on the administrative fee study, and so that gives us confidence that we understand the level of the appropriation, where that ought to be, and that's reflected in the request.
And finally, what are some efficiencies that the PHAs, I don't know why that's hard for me to say, could implement so that they can keep their overhead expenses down?
There are a number of them, actually, across the board. In fact, some of them are addressed in Chairman Luetkemeier's housing opportunity through modernization 3700 legislation, but basically they center around different things. For instance, giving flexibility with regard to inspections and income verification, especially for smaller housing authorities, so they're not as administratively burdened. They can do things other than have to routinely check on the same information year after year that oftentimes for many of the residents is staying the same. If you have, for instance, a senior resident who is on fixed income and that's demonstrated on record to the housing authority, there's really not a reason that they ought to be verified every single year. That can go to once every 2 or 3 years. Those are the types of things that we want to work with housing authorities on in order to reduce their administrative burden.
Thank you very much, Mr. Secretary. The ranking member, Mr. Price, you're recognized, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, before moving on to other questions, I want to briefly return to the initial question about choice neighborhoods, because it was a rather complicated question and certain aspects of it didn't get answered. You might want to respond for the record on some of this, but I'm eager to get on the record one way or the other the answer to the question I asked about the level of demand here, the kind of ratio of meritorious proposals, that implementation grants now we're talking about, the kind of ratio of meritorious proposals to what you're able to fund given your appropriation in recent years.
Yeah, so most recently there were 33 implementation applicants for 5 implementation grants that were awarded.
What time period does that cover?
Well, the grants that were last awarded a few months ago, so this would cover the last fiscal year's grants, which was, I believe, just done a couple, fiscal year 2014, 2015, just a couple of months ago, where these were awarded.
All right, so five grants, and how many applicants?
33.
33. That's fairly typical.
Also, you asked about planning grants. So we awarded 7 planning grants. We had 51 applicants for those grants.
All right. So that's fairly typical of recent cycles, I assume, that ratio.
It is. These are the choice neighborhoods is very popular out there. There's a lot more need than we're able to dedicate resources to. And that's one of the reasons that we're requesting a significant increase this year from the $125 million that was appropriated last year to $200 million.
Mm-hmm. Let me just quickly register a question about this new category of grants that you're proposing, the so-called planning and action grants. That aims at smaller projects. I wonder what kind of projects you're looking at there. I think I'll ask you to do this for the record because in asking the question, I'm somewhat concerned about proliferating too many small and modestly sized grants in a way that begins to eat away at the limited funding we have for implementation grants. I mean, after all, the implementation grants, the larger grants, the more comprehensive projects are what Choice Neighborhoods is all about. So I'm going to ask you to elaborate for the record how these smaller grants, especially this new category, might, what kind of volume you're anticipating there and what the budget impact would be.
We would be glad to, and as you know, this is the first time this is a new category, and we are excited about them. But would be glad to elaborate on the record of why that is and how many we anticipate making and so forth.
Yes, and of course the impact on the main item, which is the implementation grants. Now, housing for the disabled and elderly. I raised this in my opening statement. You know, Ms. Secretary, many states are struggling to comply with the Olmstead decision in terms of housing for the disabled. Need to do a lot more to integrate people with disabilities into their communities. And this mismatch is widespread between the housing available and the housing required to meet this goal. There's also a dearth of housing for the elderly, the kind of need that the 202 program has historically addressed. There's a shortage of available units, 10 people waiting often for each unit. Yet this budget request seeks no funding for additional units of housing for people with disabilities or the elderly, 202, 811. In the years past, the request has included new resources. I wonder why the request is not more ambitious. And then just on disabled housing in particular, how can HUD leverage other programs like HOME perhaps to create units to further Olmstead compliance, or the mainstream voucher program in tenant-based Section 8? Are there other ways to get at this issue besides the conventional 811 program?
Well, there are other ways. In fact, we are making a significant request of housing choice vouchers, and for instance, in the 12-month period from January 2015 to January 2016, in our HCV program, 22% of new admissions to the HCV program were non-elderly disabled families with no children. 7% were non-elderly disabled families with children, and another 7% were elderly disabled families with no children. So in total, 36% of HCV admissions were disabled families. And I point that out just to say that we are serving individuals who are disabled in several different ways. You're right, 811 and 202 have not been funded for new units. We did have a request last year, as you probably remember, for 700 new units of 811. Each year, as we make our budget requests, we do have to make these challenging choices, but it is something that is a priority and that we believe that we can make progress on in these different ways. With regard to elderly housing, I think it's the same there. We're looking forward to utilizing that fiscal year 2014 appropriation to get a better understanding from our research project on 202 housing of the link between housing and health, and how we can create savings and ensure that communities are doing everything that they can to provide investment in housing and in supportive services up front and save money to Medicare and Medicaid later. HUD is working with HHS to provide technical assistance to states that are looking for ways to utilize Medicaid dollars to provide to elderly and disabled residents. So there are different ways that we're approaching this challenge. Of course, you know, I don't disagree with you that this is very important and that new units have not been funded.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary.
We're going to do what we can.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Joyce.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, back to this AFFH example that you were giving to me prior to our getting cut off. You mentioned that there were some prior research that went into it. Could you give the subcommittee an exact example of where it is that you're using the research and data that you've gleaned from your backgrounds into making, acting in concert with a community and effectuating that outcome of the AFFH?
I would be glad to follow up with you with a list of communities and then some examples of that. Don't have those in front of me, but I know that we did engage in that, and I'm very proud of the team from our policy development and research group, as well as Fair Housing and CPD. Because this had come up in the 1990s and it had not gotten past the finish line, it was not successful. From the very beginning, they were attentive to local communities and trying to understand how we could make this feasible to them and put them in the driver's seat. And so we'd be glad to share with you on the record these different instances of plans that were put together in communities.
Well, thank you. And to that end, would you consider, are you familiar with the Chicago, Dubuque, Iowa model that your agency was working on? And would you consider movement of individuals from Chicago across a state border to Dubuque, Iowa, to be a successful example of how AFFH works for both communities, their inhabitants, and their states?
You know, I'm not familiar with that particular example. I'd love to learn more about it, but to us, the point is that there are a couple of things that we know. Number one, we know that these decisions, whether they're land use decisions or other policy decisions, are best made at the local level, and so we want to respect that. Secondly, we also know that communities and we share an interest in them making the best use of federal taxpayer dollars. And then third, we do see AFFH as part of the unfinished business of the Fair Housing Act. So I want to be straightforward with you. There is a component of ensuring that they live up to the obligation of the Fair Housing Act, but we don't want to do it in a heavy-handed way. We want to collaborate with them and let them make the decisions. In those cases where we have flagrant violations of the Fair Housing Act or communities that are just completely unwilling to work on these things, then there will be enforcement. But I see that as a last resort, not as a first way to come through the door.
Sure.
And so, you know, we have given, our folks have given a tremendous amount of thought to how you can put local communities in the driver's seat so that they can make the smart decisions about what ought to be invested and how in their community.
Well, I'm really interested to understand how moving people across state lines is somehow bettering the communities. But as you know, the other problem that we have obviously is foreclosures. And the problem that you have vacant properties, which we all know are areas where become drug houses, become centers for criminal activity in neighborhoods. These abandoned properties are a huge problem, obviously, in many communities. Do you have a plan to complement the agency's initiatives taken by the Department of Treasury through the Hardest Hit Fund, or HHF, and refurbish these communities?
Yeah, you know, this is a challenge in a lot of communities, especially coming out of the housing crisis as we have. As you remember, we had NSP funding a few years ago that was very helpful to communities in this regard. Of course, that is not a stream of revenue anymore, investment. But we encourage communities to use some traditional funding like CDBG, for instance, that has the flexibility so that they can address issues of foreclosed upon properties. Of course, at FHA, we also work in several different ways to avoid foreclosure, to help folks avoid foreclosure. And we've revamped our DASP, Distressed Asset Sales Program, to try and get more of those properties into the hands of nonprofits that are willing to work with residents, avoid foreclosure, and also are mindful of the neighborhood impact when there's a foreclosed property. So, you know, there are several steps that we're taking. In addition to that, let me just say that we're very proud of the housing counseling that HUD has done, HUD has funded. We're requesting $47 billion, which is what was appropriated last year. Part of that is foreclosure counseling to help avoid foreclosures. So we're trying to address this in multiple ways.
Well, I appreciate that, but you know, we're looking at those houses that are already gone. And for lack of a better term, they're bad bones. You know, there's nothing to be recouped about it, so they need to be taken down. So that's why HHF and the HAMP money that we got together. I was wondering if you've been working in concert with Secretary Liu about trying to get that money into the communities that need it the most.
Well, to the extent that these communities request some sort of technical assistance, our folks, of course, are in communication with Treasury, but I can follow up with you in terms of their individual communities that we've been working on together, sure.
That'd be great. Thank you very much.
Mr. Cuellar.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, let me ask you to look at the HUD-VASH, the Federal Rental Assistance with the VA. In Laredo, Laredo only receives about 15 of those vouchers. I know that there is a point-in-time survey that's done, but there's something happening where we still have a lot of veterans still homeless in Laredo, even though I understand this survey and what they use that for, to the point where, you know, even some of the veterans that have relatives in Nuevo Laredo will go to Nuevo Laredo so they can afford being over there. And I think it's a shame that they have to go across the river into Mexico to get housing. Could I ask you to just have your folks work with us a little closely on this particular issue? Because I'll be happy to show you this, you know, big story that got written locally. I think it's a 2-3-part series about veterans, and it's just one of those issues. I know there's never enough money. I understand that, but I would ask you all to, you know, if you can assign one of your best ones, Jaime Castillo or Robbie Greenblum, or one of the folks from San Antonio to work with me. But I would ask you to just work with us on this, because I know the city manager, Jesus Olivares, is here in the audience with us, and it's an issue that we've been trying to figure out, and we just can't seem to get over this survey point in time. So I would ask you to just work. I know you're very passionate about this issue and want to work with your office.
Absolutely, and you know, we are very proud because of everyone working together that we've seen a 36% reduction in veteran homelessness over the last few years. At the same time, we know that number one, we can't stop pushing and driving that number down. Secondly, we need to reach all communities. So, for instance, from the fiscal year 2016 funding that we received, we're creating another category for smaller communities to get HUD-VASH, to more proactively work and get these HUD-VASH vouchers into some of the smaller communities at a greater level. And we believe that that's going to help fill the gap out there for some of these smaller communities. I did have an opportunity yesterday to meet with one of your council members and the assistant city manager, and my staff had a longer meeting with them, and this was one of the issues that they took up, and so we look forward to following up.
I think it was Councilman Roque Vela, I believe, the one that was there. And yeah, we do want to follow up because it's an ongoing, and you know, it's just shameful that they have to go to another country to get housing on that. So I look forward to working with you. I also want to extend the invitation again to, I think we had talked about you going down to Laredo. So we'll find a time that works and have you go down to Laredo, and City of Laredo will be willing to host you. I know we had the chairman down there, and he saw the transportation needs that we have. The largest inland port in the United States is in Laredo. So we'd love to host you down there sometime. And as you know, you were the Señor Internacional a couple years ago.
That is true.
Which is a big celebration where they recognize somebody from the U.S. and somebody from Mexico. And the secretary was the Señor Internacional. So, Secretary, thank you for your good work.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Cuellar. And there's no doubt that Laredo is, frankly, a very special place. It really is. It is a very special place. Mr. Secretary, let me just go to one more area. And again, I thank you for being here and for being forthcoming. I want to talk briefly about moving to work. And for the FY 2016 bill, we gave authority to establish 100 more moving to work agencies. But you know, our foremost goal, though, is to see that see what works well, and then expand those ideas across HUD programs. However, GAO and HUD's IG have noted repeatedly that HUD does not have performance measures in place to gauge the effectiveness of MTW agencies. And worse, we have seen some agencies use MTW flexibilities, frankly, to avoid accountability or use funds for purposes other than serving the people in need. Mr. Secretary, what is your time frame for designating those 100 new MTWs, and what criteria for selecting the participants will be used?
Yeah, this is a great question. Number one, the 39 MTW agencies that we have now have done a number of creative things over the years that I believe demonstrate the value of MTW. You're correct that ensuring that we have better ways to measure the outcomes that have been achieved because of MTW ought to be a priority, and it is a priority. Because of the new authority that we have, we'll increase the number of MTW agencies by 100. That gives us the opportunity in this new contract with those new MTW agencies the chance to include more performance metrics and I believe be able to measure the value of MTW in unprecedented ways. As to your question of how we're going to implement this, the legislation requires us to establish an advisory committee. And so we have begun work going forward to get an advisory committee together. We expect over the next couple of months to do that, to make recommendations on what this expansion of MTW should look like. The legislation gave us a number of years to accomplish the 100 MTW agency addition. So this will be phased in. We don't anticipate that it's going to happen all at once. It will be in manageable phases. I can't say right now whether that'll be 10 or 15 in the first round, but I think that advisory committee with its expertise will help us determine that. But to your point of being able to measure the outcomes better, I'm completely in agreement with you that this new approach ought to include more of that, because right now, frankly, I do think that there's a dearth of that information.
Do you anticipate that this expansion will have an actual cost, a cost in terms of HUD's staff time to review, to select, frankly, to monitor these new agencies, MTW agencies?
There will be a cost associated with it, and in future budget requests, we believe that it would be appropriate to provide the salary and expense increases necessary in our public and Indian housing program area to keep up with the additional monitoring and collaboration with these MTW agencies. Right now, I can't tell you with specificity how much or how many people we're having to deal with this issue for AFFH as we ramp up in the Fair Housing Office, for instance, our AFFH engagement. So I do think that there are going to be some costs associated with it. No numbers yet, but we'd be glad to work with the committee going forward on it.
And again, and you touched about the issue of measuring performance. And do you any idea how you intend to measure performance? So that the best practices can be documented and hopefully repeated elsewhere.
Yeah. Well, to my mind, and certainly the folks who are working on this in our public and Indian housing, I believe, and the members of the advisory committee will have a more crystallized sense of this. But to my mind, the flexibility that we're allowing these MTW agencies is meant to have better outcomes,
right,
in terms of self-sufficiency, for instance, of the residents of public housing. So the kinds of performance metrics or outcomes that I'd like to see measured are, compare a non-MTW agency to an MTW agency and tell me, what is the average length of time that a public housing resident lives in public housing? How long is a family there in one versus the other? How have you been able to use your flexibility to create self-sufficiency faster? Let's look at the educational achievement of residents in MTW agencies versus non-MTW agencies, or income levels in one versus the other. These bottom line outcome assessments that will show us whether, in a more specific way, I think, whether the flexibility that we've allowed is paying off in the life outcomes of the people that we're serving. To me, that's what's most important.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Secretary. I appreciate that. Mr. Price.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let me move to public housing, and in particular the capital backlog in public housing. You're well aware, of course, that there is a backlog of $25 billion when it comes to repairing and maintaining our public housing stock. Congress bears primary responsibility for that, for chronically underfunding this account. I start out by saying that. However, I'm concerned that HUD didn't ask for any increase in the Public Housing Capital Fund in the fiscal 17 request. I wonder why that's so, what it indicates. Wonder if you could discuss the rationale behind that decision to provide essentially flat funding for public housing capital needs when it's clear we're falling farther and farther and farther behind. And then, secondly, I wonder if you could reflect on the impetus that lies behind moving to work, for example, which you've just been discussing, or the Rental Assistance Demonstration Program, the RAD program, or for that matter, choice neighborhoods and other demonstration programs. To what extent are these programs drawing on discontent or the shortfall of adequate housing for the public, adequate funding for the Public Housing Capital Fund? I mean, are we seeing here ways of compensating for that? Clearly, we have a problem with that essential capital fund appropriation. So I guess I'm asking you very broadly, what are the strategies for dealing with it, and to what extent are they or are they not reflected in the budget before us?
Yeah, you're right, Representative Price, that over the years, the funding has not been there to keep up with the public housing capital needs. And we do have over a $25 billion backlog in public housing capital needs. And so what you've seen is that we've had to become creative. And the Rental Assistance Demonstration Project, RAD, represents one way that we've done that with the private sector. An analysis that we got about a year and a half ago showed that of the first 57 deals of RAD, for every $1 of federal dollar that was invested there were 19 non-federal dollars that it leveraged. So RAD has been successful in leveraging private dollars and some philanthropic dollars, I believe. With regard to the capital housing needs that we have, you're correct that that this request this year, I believe, is a $35 million reduction from what was enacted last year. And in part, that's because we do see more activity on the RAD side. You know, we've converted 30,000 units. We already have the applications for 185,000. We have a waiting list of 11,000 units now. We're asking Congress to remove the cap because we believe that the demand is there and that there are a lot of units that can be renovated. If we would lift that cap, and we can do some of this work successfully. But we're also requesting some flexibility so that public housing authorities can use 30% of their operating and capital money interchangeably, so that if there are some dire capital needs that they feel have to be addressed now, that they do have some flexibility to do that. This is, of course, the kind of flexibility that exists for MTW agencies. And in the past, we have made a broader request for flexibility, but we feel that the 30% flexibility request makes sense and that it could be used for some of these needs.
Thank you. That's helpful. I just observed, though, that the answer you gave regarding the Public Housing Capital Fund, just like the answer you gave earlier on Section 202 rental housing for the elderly and on Section 811 housing for the disabled. All of that just underscores the limitations we're operating under, and this is even with a budget agreement. This is getting off of the sequestration level, but not nearly adequately in terms of the needs we're addressing. So I hope for a good allocation this year as we write the bills. I of course hope and expect that we will have our usual collaborative process across party lines. But I just am stunned by the magnitude of this task and just how much we're having to devote to this budget to simply staying in place. Sure. So we have a lot of work to do. We of course look forward to you as a full partner in this effort.
Certainly.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Price. Mr. Cuellar, further questions? No further questions. All right. Mr. Secretary, this has been very helpful. Let me once again thank you and also your staff for your participating and your participation today and for answering our questions. The committee staff will be in contact with your budget office regarding questions for the record. I know we'll have a number of questions to submit, and I would imagine I'll have some, and I imagine that other members will have questions as well. If you would please work with OMB to return the information for the record to the subcommittee within 30 days from Friday, we would then be able to publish the transcripts of today's hearing and make informed decisions when crafting the fiscal year 2017 bill. And again, look forward to working with you. Also, I've always appreciated you being totally accessible. And you know, this subcommittee looks forward to working with you as we put this bill together for this year. Tomorrow, we will see the administrator of the Federal Aviation Administration. Look forward to that. Mr. Price, any final comments?
No, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
With that, Mr. Secretary, again, our gratitude, and with that, we will now close this hearing. Thank you.
Thank you so much.